Welcome to Tech for Founder podcast. I'm your host, Panida, and today we're diving into the inspiring journey of Wanito Bernadin, a tech leader with a unique path from startups to government leadership. His insights are must for founders, whether you're tech savvy or not. Stay tuned to explore how he bridges these worlds and the lessons that he's sharing in his upcoming book, Dad's Car Rides. It's a conversation you wouldn't want to miss. Welcome, Wanito. So, can you please walk us through your journey, starting from your experience in the tech startup world and how you eventually landed in your current role as Chief Information Officer in the Canadian federal government? What were these pivotal moments or experiences that significantly influenced your career path?
Thank you. Certainly, I started my career around 20 years ago. And at the time, out of school, I started with a small technology company selling enterprise resource planning systems to government and municipal government throughout Canada. And at the time, I had the option of doing a little of everything that gets done in a tech startup. So I started with sales and marketing, but then eventually did some support, some consulting, a little bit of programming in the back-end database, and touched everything. And over a 12-year period, I was able to travel throughout the country, implement systems for municipal government, and eventually get promoted to being the general manager of the company, which was the highest ranking office, reporting to the board of directors. And during that time, I also got to meet some interesting clients, both at the municipal government level and also federal government level. And eventually, through those experiences of consulting and traveling, I eventually got a taste of what it could be like to be on the client side serving the general public. And eventually, when the opportunity came, I made the change going from the private sector to the public sector and into federal government, doing very similar work to what I had done when working in the private world.
That's an excellent story. I think the fact that you came from the private sector and then moved to the public sector, it really gave you that kind of edge of knowing what industry needs and also applying that to our services.
Mm-hmm.
So your career has encompassed a variety of roles in the tech industry, ranging from consultant to project manager to business leader. How have these multifaceted experiences shaped your leadership style, especially in your present role as Chief Information Officer?
Well, I can tell you, I have a great deal of compassion and respect for the various roles that are involved in an information management and information technology organization. I understand the interdependencies between the various fields and how critical it is to collaborate with experts in their fields in order to serve the ultimate client or the ultimate stakeholder. I also understand how important it is sometimes to be able to make compromises in our respective fields. What I found is often we get so passionate about our own discipline that we have a way of looking at the world that is very siloed, and we expect everything to be done to the letter according to our policies, our rules, and our best practices. And we fail to realize that the ultimate goal is not just to satisfy our requirements, but it's to deliver a product or a service for a client. And sometimes that requires that we have flexibility in the way that we see our respective domains. So I've learned these things over the years, and it helps me be a more empathetic, more compassionate, and more understanding Chief Information Officer within the government.
Definitely. I think it's very true. Like in the tech industry, they always say, listen to users, right? Because you're essentially only doing things for your clients. And I think, and I think one of the main issue is that sometimes as tech people, we feel the need to create like a really great design or a really great software, but we have to make sure that our clients actually want it as well.
You're correct. There is no real value in what we do if at the end there isn't a user that finds it valuable in order to solve a real problem.
Absolutely. So do you have any examples of how this played out in possibly a project that you worked on?
Certainly, in the government, you will find there is a great deal of focus on the information management discipline. This is the entire notion of keeping private information private and treating information in the right way. You'll also find there's a great deal of focus on cybersecurity, and that's necessary because we have custodianship and stewardship over important assets, and if we are negligent with that information or those assets, we put the lives of people at risk in a very real way. And so often on projects, you will find that those two disciplines, information management and cybersecurity, are treated as control disciplines so that the solutions team that's doing development, that's doing programming, coding, and consulting, they're looking to go as fast as possible to deliver to the client. But the information management and cybersecurity teams are saying, slow down. We need to do a privacy impact assessment. We need to do a security assessment. We need to ensure that there's no threat, no vulnerability. So on numerous projects, I have found myself being the mediator between the various teams and various domains. Some of the techniques I've used have been to, for example, right size the assessment. Sometimes you will find that you have a privacy impact assessment document that is quite long with many questions, and some of those questions don't necessarily apply to the risk profile of the given project. So you need to right size your assessment in order to fit the size of the risk. That's an example. Or sometimes you will find that to mitigate cybersecurity risks, you will leverage a tool or a technology that another government agency has already used and has already assessed, so that now you're only assessing your specific environmental differences instead of evaluating the entire technology or platform, because that's already been done by another. Those are just two examples of the ways that you try to meet the needs, be agile, flexible, quick, but at the same time not compromise on important factors such as management of information and security.
That's excellent. Especially what you said about reusing technology that already works to the applications that you are using, and also customization and making sure that you're actually customizing it to the specific domain that you're working on.
That's correct.
So you've had a unique opportunity to hold leadership positions in both the private and public sector within the tech field. Can you shed light on how you adapt your leadership approach when transitioning between these different environments? Additionally, what valuable lessons can non-technical founders glean from your adaptability?
What I found is that in the public sector, there is more of an emphasis on the well-being of the total person. And there's certainly more available resources in order to make that happen. So you think about contexts such as mental health, diversity, and inclusion. These are things you heard about in the private sector, at least back when I was involved, but it was a clear focus in the public sector. So I've learned as a leader to care more about the entirety of the person. I've also learned the importance of putting the well-being of the citizens ahead of, for example, profitability or ahead of cost constraints. When you look at the entire mantra or mandate of an organization, there needs to be a triple bottom line focus: financial responsibility, employee well-being, and client well-being. That's what we refer to as the triple bottom line. I've also learned in the public setting to understand that there are political stakeholders to worry about and think of. You think about the union groups, you think about your external partners and stakeholders, and you also think quite a bit about reputational risks. Because whenever you do anything, you think about what the implication would be if this were to be promoted first page on the local newspaper. Would it stand the test of scrutiny? Would there be any embarrassment? You really think about these things carefully. So I found, having gone from private to public, I'm able to bring a deep focus on results, and attention on financial responsibility, and attention on agility and innovation, and then marry that with the thought about the well-being of the entire person, the consideration for reputational risk, and then very deep care for the citizen service at the center of it all.
Well, I love that. I think it's very important to bridge between innovation and well-being of the people, and I think more tech people should be in government because I think especially with Because, well, in the bureaucracy, I feel like sometimes it's very difficult to innovate, and the fact that you came from the private sector and you've been innovating your whole life, it makes it undeniable that you're absolutely going to innovate within government.
That's correct. And at the same time, find ways to be innovation first, but at the same time, people first too, if you can do both at the same time. So you want to
Yeah, definitely.
advance, but you never want to leave the client behind, right? So you're remembering that the reason for the innovation is in order to better serve the client. And there's a way to have a happy marriage of those two.
Definitely. So, as Chief Information Officer, you play a critical role in leveraging technology for innovation within a government institution like Library and Archives Canada. Can you share some of the strategies and approaches you employ to effectively harness technology's power and foster innovation within this context?
We spoke about earlier the concept of starting with a client. And so I'm always looking for a business problem and a business need that the innovation can solve. A popular saying is to always begin with the end in mind. So we think about what are the end goals and how will this innovation help us achieve this end goal with the client at the center. I also like to think about ways that we can start small, produce a quick win that our business partner can experience, celebrate, and then they can become the champion to get more funding. That's very key because in our context, we can't always afford to innovate on all the fronts that we would like and with all the extent that we would like. So we have to be strategic to pick partners who are first keen to innovate, keen to try new things, and who are also good champions so that after they've experienced a win, they can turn around and go and convince others to either join in from the perspective of change management or also convince others to help fund further development. So those would be three key points: focusing on a real business need, not getting so in love with the technology and the innovation that we can't even think of the way that it will solve a business problem. Secondly, partnering with someone on something small and then developing the win and then using that in order to go and solicit more wins, solicit more funds, and accelerate the pace of change.
That's excellent. I especially like what you said about when you talk about focusing on a real business need, because I think this is very important, especially in the tech industry, because some people like to think that, hey, like focus on, hey, let's just implement AI, let's implement this technology, but they don't focus on solving a real problem. And once you do that and you are able to solve it, that's when people start to support you and you get more partners.
That's correct. That's correct. And you also discover whether your innovation is viable because technology and innovation gets tested in the wild, not in a lab. So you need to put it through real life scenarios in order to see how it responds to real life events. And then you also get to test some of your theories and perfect some of your ideas and innovation. So incubators and labs and pilots are great utilities to use for that purpose.
Absolutely. So you're not only a tech leader, but also a real estate investor and musician. How do these side interests contribute to your overall perspective and problem-solving abilities, both in tech and in life?
They say one of the great leadership characteristics we should all strive for is transcendence. This is the ability to pull from various domains and areas of our lives, such as art and sociology and other traits, in order to avail positive change and solve problems in business, science, and technology. So in my case, being a musician from the time I was young, playing the bass guitar and having played with bands, I understand concepts of harmony. I also understand concepts of volume. So sometimes in order for the band to sound good, another instrument needs to play louder than the other. Not because your instrument can't play loud, it's just that at that particular time, it's good for you to turn your volume down to allow someone else to go ahead. And so I apply that in my day-to-day as well. In my decision making, in our strategies, we recognize that sometimes we have to take a back seat for another player, another domain to move forward. I'm also able to leverage creativity and imagination rather than looking at just steps 1 through to 12 in a very sequential way, I think about what could be done in parallel. What can we do going to step 12 and then coming back to step 2, right? These things are all permitted in my mind because of the fluidity of my thinking. And also from a real estate point of view, I think of ways of selling, right? I'm always selling, whether I'm selling an idea, a concept, but through relationship, identifying needs, asking questions, and looking for win-wins. Those are attributes that I take even in my day-to-day work as a CIO. These aspects of art and business all unite to make me a more well-rounded, full person who's able to meet people where they are and compel them to move forward with us in order to achieve a common objective.
That's excellent. I think interdisciplinarity is so important, especially in this age, because right now we're kind of in the process in which a lot of things are getting automated. And I think the fact that you're able to pull from this different disciplines, like for example, your sales skills from real estate and also your musician skills, really enables you to be creative and kind of be ahead and more valuable than a robot.
That's right. Yeah, it's the entire person, right? We are the sum of all of these experiences, and we can multiply our value when we can combine these domains that seem at face value to be so different, but we bring them together to create something that's unique and fresh. Certainly much better than robots.
Absolutely. So your upcoming book, Dad's Car Rides, sounds intriguing. Could you share a few key life and business lessons from the book that you believe would resonate with aspiring tech founders?
Certainly. I speak about 2 main areas in the book. The first is focused on the self, and so self-competencies. And the second is about contributions to the world, to the teams that we lead and the organizations in which we belong. On the topic of change, I speak of the importance of enlisting contrarians or people who don't openly support our change ideas to be part of our change coalition. Oftentimes, when we're trying to lead a massive change, we surround ourselves with people who are fully passionate about the change we're trying to make, whether it's building a new software, building a new company, making a new process change. We build a coalition of the willing and the brave, and that's good. It's important. It's also important, though, to enlist someone who is openly against our idea, openly against our initiative. Because when you do that, you can ask them questions and understand what their objections are. And by doing that, you will first discover what is likely to be objection that you're going to meet from others who would think like them. 2, you get to strengthen your idea because there might be some truth and validity to their objection, and then you get to perfect your idea. And next thing you know, as you engage them and involve them more, they may in fact go from being a contrarian to being a supporter. And when they do become a supporter, they'll know exactly what words to use and what techniques to use that compel them to go from not believing to believing. So there's great strength in taking the time early on to go and look for people who think differently. And if you're worried that, well, why would they come and join my coalition if they disagree? I would tell you, you'd be surprised how many people who disagree with you actually want an audience with you as a leader. So if you bring them close, it's quite compelling for them to be close to the CIO or close to the leadership and understand that their voice is being heard. It's quite an incentive for them to be part of that coalition. So that's one concept. I also think about the concept of marketing and specifically about a very well-known concept of unique value proposition. And so here, of course, we talk about focusing on a feature or a benefit that is unique, that allows you to differentiate yourself from the competition. And when that's done very well, you migrate from a UVP to a UEP, which is a unique emotional proposition. And often the difference between the two is your brand promise, right? So when you have a brand that is compelling, you promise something that is lofty, that is grand, that is greater than self for the individual. And they connect with your brand so much that it's no longer just about the features and benefits you provide. It's about how you make them feel about themselves. And when you can get to that point as a marketer, then you really win. You now no longer have to compete on the basis of price or other attributes. You now have a direct link to their heart. And so long as you continue to deliver on your promise, then they will continue to be loyal to you. And then lastly, I also speak about managing and retaining talent. We often start to hoard talent. So you have a team and you have someone who's a great developer or a great consultant or a great writer. And because they're good at their skill, you just want to put them in a box and hope that they continue delivering with that skill forever because it advantages you as the leader or as the business owner. And that's a sure way to eventually lose talented people, because what I've discovered is high performers in one area tend to want to become high performers in many areas. So if you want to retain top talent, you have to find ways to give them assignments and opportunities to develop in other traits and other domains while they're continuing to deliver in their core competency. And if you do that well, eventually you get people who migrate from being a top performer in area A to top performer in area B, C, D, and they want to stay with you and grow with you because they see that you are an agent for growth for them personally, versus the very limited scope of saying, you know what, you're good at this, I just want you to do this forever because it's good for me. That's one sure way to lose top talent.
Absolutely. I think I really like all the points. And the first point, what you said about making sure you bring on a contrarian, is very interesting because I think in the tech industry, we talk a lot about early adopters. Like, hey, if they're not our early adopter, it's fine. We move on. We find someone who is an early adopter. But the fact that you intentionally bring on someone who doesn't agree with your idea makes a lot of sense as well, because I think user feedback is so important in improving a product, right? And the fact that you have user feedback from someone who has tested it and have found a problem, it's actually kind of a gold mine for founders.
Absolutely. Yeah,
And
we have
also,
blind spots, right?
Yeah, definitely. And also what you said about emotional proposition, I think it's really key, because when you like use a piece of software and you feel something, it's like it's over. Like you'll pay for it no matter what, because we're humans, right? We're humans.
Right.
We operate more on emotions than we do with our logic anyway. And the fact that, and what you said about retaining top talent is very true, because I think people get bored, right? Especially high performers. Like even if they're like the best software engineer in the world, they're continuously doing that, and you're like, hey, keep doing that, but eventually they're gonna be like, hey, maybe I should try public speaking, right? Like, why are you not giving me opportunities in public speaking? So maybe you should, so to keep them.
Absolutely.
So in addition to your book, you've started a podcast with your daughter. How does this podcast reflect your values and experiences, and what messages do you hope to convey through it?
I did the podcast as part of the promotional activities for the book, and it provided an opportunity for my eldest daughter, who's 16, and I to have some really interesting conversations. One episode that we released spoke about relationships in all of its forms, in school, at home, at church. And we reflected on a study that demonstrated that one of the most important criterion for people to be happy in life is actually having safe emotional relationships in which people feel free to be themselves without fear of consequence. And you often found that people who feel quite fulfilled and happy in life, more than money, more than career success, what dictated their happiness or joy was the fact that they had a few good, solid relationships. You actually don't even need many. Just a couple will do. But we discovered through conversation and through research that a person that has that foundation of strong relationships with a few people is able to be more resilient and also be able to be to adapt, right? When life gets hard, they have places to go to for support, for truth, and for the kind of advice that you actually need to hear when you're not doing the right thing. So often we're surrounded, even as leaders, by people who just say yes because now we've gotten to a position of power, when really what you need are people who can tell you the truth when you're not going the right way, and emotionally both of you are safe enough to respond to that truth and take it and move on. So I wanted her to also see, through us doing the podcast together, that it's okay to do activities outside of your vocation and your domain that are not financially driven. They're just activities where you enjoy something, you give back to your community, and you get a sense of fulfillment from doing the activity itself. That was an important aspect both of writing the book, but also doing the podcast with it.
That's brilliant. Well, as someone who's a daughter myself, I think this is amazing. This is like a great father-daughter activity, and also I think the fact that you taught about how to create like good relationships and how meaningful it is to our life and work. Because a lot of people think that hey, like if you're successful, you'll be happy, but that's
Mm-hmm.
not true at all. Like actually, uh it will amplify the things that made you unhappy. Like if you're like concerned about people looking at you, when once you're like you get famous, people are going to look at you, and then and that's exactly it's going to get worse. So I think the fact that you talked about how to improve human relationships and having a few close friends who would actually tell you the hard truth when you're like going downhill, and like these people you really need in your life.
Yep. There are few in your life. Sometimes you only have one, but this particular study that we spoke of revealed that you don't need many. You really only need a few quality relationships.
Definitely. So community service seems to be an essential part of your life. How has your commitment to community service influenced your approach to leadership and tech-driven initiatives?
Generally, I tell you, I look for ways to use technology to solve social problems. I gravitate towards organizations that use technology to solve major things. For example, at Library and Archives Canada, the use of technology enables the freedom to information so that people who have a very intriguing history in the country that is deep with many stories and varied perspectives, who want to retrace that history and understand where they're from and where they're going, can come to the organization and ask for information that is 50, 100 years old in order to read about themselves and discover their community and their people. That's of great value to me. I also worked on projects that would have provided the opportunity to accelerate the speed at which an employee is able to receive financial assistance from the government if they were to stop working for any reason. So I always look for opportunities to leverage technology to ameliorate the lot of those who are either less fortunate or simply to make people of higher performance, but always for a benevolent aim, for something that is positive. That's been the beautiful marriage for me of community, technology, and then the well-being of mankind.
That's amazing. I think I really liked what you did for the community, especially in terms of tracing back your history. Do you have any interesting stories to tell about like someone who came in and they traced their interesting history?
Yeah, I heard an anecdote not too long ago of someone who came into the organization and was looking at some pictures, and the pictures had no captions and were not traced. And so it took some doing and some time, but after some research and some digging and digging and digging, they were able to find enough correlated metadata to identify that someone they were seeing in this picture was actually related to them. And that was kind of a moving moment for someone to come in and realize that the organization actually has that kind of information about their family, things that they had only heard about before through anecdotes and stories. Now they were able to see through these artifacts. And so stories like that happen all the time within a national institution that's devoted to documenting the national heritage of its people.
Oh, that's amazing. So, with your extensive background in both the private and public sector, how can non-technical founders effectively bridge the gap between entrepreneurship and government initiatives to leverage technology for business success?
Earlier, we were speaking about innovation, and I want to tackle innovation in this respect by saying that often entrepreneurs have a innovative mindset, and we come into organizations with a desire to disrupt. And one of the aspects that we have to be careful of in a public sector setting or even a social enterprise setting is that being disruptive sometimes can actually leave destruction behind. And so we have to find the right balance between being on the bleeding edge of technology or the bleeding edge of change and on the leading edge, and also put our ego to the side. There are many examples throughout society and throughout time when a particular disruption seemed great and good at the moment, and everyone was riding the wave. Money's being made, we're promoting it, we're happy. And then next thing you know, after a little bit of time, we recognize, that innovation really wasn't everything we thought it was going to be or what it promised to be. And then when you look at what it's left behind in its wake, there are a lot of unhappy people, people who've lost a lot of money or time or energy, sometimes even in the worst cases, loss of life, right? So when you are an entrepreneur operating in whatever world you operate, you think about the cost of innovation, not only in material, but also what will be left behind if this innovation doesn't pan out. And the reality is that as much as we hope for the best, we do have examples that show that not everything that looks like progress, in fact, is progress. Sometimes something looks like progress, and when it's finished, it actually leaves people worse off than they were before. And so as a way to mitigate that, I found that it's useful to always leave at least a remnant of the infrastructure of the past while you're innovating, so that if ever you find yourself in a position where that innovation doesn't deliver the full benefit you would hope for, you still have a remnant of the infrastructure of the past that you can either piggyback on, connect to, or even go back to. It's kind of like that great undo button, but never get to a point where you completely decimate the past, focus completely on your bleeding edge idea. And if it doesn't pan out, now you've left everyone with less service than they had before, right? So usually the things we're trying to undo with innovation, while they're not perfect, they have been here for a long time. So a lot of the imperfections have been worked out and at least compensated for. Whereas your innovation, if it's not perfect, there isn't that history to know how to compensate for its flaws. So that's a dimension that I encourage entrepreneurs to think of, especially those who are straddling between pure for-profit and for-citizen or for-service organizations.
That's very good advice. Like, I think it's very important to at least leave the undo button left metaphorically, so that you can go back. Because for example, like if you created like a new system and then you miss out some important information and that was still in the paper-based system, the fact that you didn't throw away the paper-based system because you were so excited about innovation would be really useful, because like, hey, let's just keep some of these books behind. Maybe we'll need it. And sometimes you do.
That's right.
So looking ahead, what do you see as the most significant opportunities and challenges for non-technical founders in leveraging technology for business success?
Look, I would say a great challenge is the abundance of information. There has always been information. The speed at which it gets produced and distributed now is so rapid that a would-be entrepreneur or current entrepreneur struggles daily to understand what is worth absorbing and what is not worth absorbing. So I encourage everyone to develop the skill of discernment to quickly be able to filter what should be absorbed and what should be left behind, point one. And then after having absorbed sometimes quite a bit of information, having the skill to distill, summarize that information, and then lastly, be able to communicate it in a concise way so that someone who doesn't understand the details you understand is able to get the gist of your ideas. Because you'll find that in order to advance, you will be speaking to people who sometimes hold the power, hold the resources, and hold the money, but don't have your knowledge. And you cannot expect them to get to where you are with your 500 pages of having read material in order to get to a decision. You need to be able to take those 500 pages, turn them into 4 or 5 bullet points that are compelling and to the point in order for them to advance and progress. So that ability as entrepreneurs to distill, absorb, and communicate concise information will be key. But the world is full of opportunities. In fact, every threat presents an opportunity. You think of everything going on in the world of cyber. I would encourage any founder, tech or non-tech, to at least get familiar with some basic concepts of zero trust, architecture, encryptions, levels of assurance, those basic notions of cybersecurity, because the world we live in is fraught with risk in that domain. Data loss prevention. Every year, we're hearing of countless records being stolen, hacked, accessed, and even if you're not in the tech world, if you're just in an organization, there is a possibility that one day you would find yourself victim to something like this. And it would be good for you to understand, okay, what are the basic steps to respond to an incident? What's forensic analysis in that concept? How do you isolate? How do you prevent the blast radius from being too wide so that one threat becomes multiple threats? So these notions are quite important, I think, for everyone to understand. And if you were to ask me where do I think we're going to go, look, I think we're heading into an era in which the threats will be so prevalent in so many domains. We will have to build businesses and data with the assumption that it's public and open by default, because we'll be so at risk of attacks that to try to always be a step ahead of the threat actors will cost us more money than we have and more money than it takes to just deliver on our mandate. So I think we'll have to rethink this whole thing of protection and data and just create systems that are created in such a way that, you know what, even if you were to get into this and see everything that is there, so what? There's nothing you can do with it because we've built systems in such a way that it requires 4 or 5 disparate pieces of data to come together, where 4 or 5 parties hold a portion of the key, and the key has to come together at this point in time physically for it to actually become a data record you can do something with, right? So I'm just thinking of a future in which we just have to be prepared for this reality that data is accessible to everyone, and we have to find new mechanisms to protect not so much the privacy of the information, but just protect from egregious actions from being taken with that information.
That's a very interesting perspective. Building systems that you assume are going to be made public. It's yeah, I think like I've had someone come on the podcast, and then there were some people who were concerned about privacy concerns of AI. And my guess, he was like, you know what, like all the tech companies have your data. Are you really secure? Why, if they're able to do something out of the data you give them and create value for you, you know what, just give them all your secrets. Just give them all your data, because, what's security anyway? We're all big tech companies, and our data is everywhere on the internet. So what is 100% security?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a false illusion of protection, but sometimes people feel secure when they pay for something that is said to them to be secure. So the fact that you've paid kind of gives you a false sense of security, and that's how we sleep better at night. But time will tell whether those protections are truly worth it. In fact, you'll find that most even protection agencies have moved away from protecting to now saying, we will help you recover once it's happened. So now you're not paying for protection, you're paying for assistance once there's a breach so they can help you recover. And I think that's a sign of where we're headed.
Definitely. So I really liked how you also talked about the ability to convey information in a concise manner for founders, because I think there's so much information out there, and the people who usually have the power, they don't have much time to listen to you. So you have to condense it for them. And also to make sure that there's not too much jargon in it, because no one wants to listen to a bunch of jargon. They just want to know what you're able to do and what problem you can solve. So we're closing up with this final point. And thank you so much, Wanito, for joining the podcast.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.